Welcome to Focus, Faith, and Fueling, the Winning Edge podcast, where young athletes, parents, and coaches learn how mindset, nutrition, and faith work together to elevate performance, resilience, and overall health.
What you eat and how you think can elevate and transform your game. If you're ready to gain a true mental edge, fuel your body with purpose, and stay grounded in what truly matters, then this podcast is for you.
We are your hosts. I'm Lindsay, former collegiate athlete, author, coach, and educational coach for over 20 years, and a mom to two young athletes.
And I'm Stacy, sports dietitian, author, speaker, and nutritional consultant for over 19 years, and a mom of two teen athletes. Today, we're diving into where food is headed next, on our plates, for our health systems, and across the entire food economy. My guest today is Mike Lee, a food futurist, an innovation strategist who has spent nearly 2 decades helping companies imagine and build what we'll be eating in the next 5 to 25 years. He is the co-founder and CEO of Alpha Food Labs, a food innovation company that partners with brands and retailers to create products and strategies that are better for people, the planet, and your palate. Mike is also the founder of the Future Food Market, a futurist food lab that uses concept products and storytelling to explore what our food system could look like. His work sits at the intersection of design, technology, and food culture, shaped in part by growing up in his family's Chinese restaurants in Detroit, and later leading innovation initiatives for major food brands. Today, he's a global speaker and host of the Tomorrow Today show, where he unpacks how sustainability, emerging tech, and consumer behavior are reshaping the way we grow, shop for, and experience food. In this episode, Mike and I are going to zoom in and out, looking at the future of food through the lens of food as medicine, and how it shows up in agriculture, the grocery retail space, and across healthcare. We'll walk through some big predictions, from food as medicine going mainstream, to AI-powered personal nutrition, to protein innovation, smarter supply chains, and the food health workforce that will need to be created to rise up to make all of this real. If you care about where food, nutrition, and health are headed and how that impacts your work, your athletes, or even your own kitchen, you're in the right spot. Let's jump into this conversation with Mike Lee. Mike, thank you for being on with us today. I'm so grateful to have you and for our guests to get to hear from you and your thoughts in this space.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
I met you, I guess, a while back at Google Food Lab, which was super fun, and started to chat with you and kind of got to know you a little bit more, checked out some of the resources that you're putting out, and was like, okay, we need this guy to come on, because for season 3, our families, our coaches that are tuning in, wanting to learn more about nutrition and this food as medicine space, we're always trying to take what are the trends, things that we're hearing about in social media, what are we hearing from our friends and family, combine that with, well, what does the science really actually support? Because sometimes there's a lot of noise in those spaces, but things that aren't really supported by scientific evidence that are good for health from a food as medicine perspective. And then what are people hearing about the policy changes and the regulatory changes that are what they're going to see when they're shopping in a store or shopping online? And so we like to get in that space. And I thought, what a great guest to have on as you think about this space, given your background and interest and impact in the space of food, and as we think about food playing an important role in health. So kick us off. I'd love to just kind of hear from you. What do you think some of the top trends are that are worth paying attention to as we think about this space moving forward?
Well, it's sort of funny because when I kind of look at trends, I kind of think of trends in 2 different categories. I think there's this stuff that's out there, right? The people talking about GLP-1s or the new dietary guidelines, or whatever ashwagandha thing is the thing of the moment, there's always that. And then there's the more fatty, fashiony things like Dubai chocolate, which isn't really about nutrition per se, but that's just kind of a thing culturally, people are into. I think that's all kind of one category. And then I kind of also, I realized years ago, because I do a lot of trend work in my daily life, people that kind of talk about trends also help propel them. It's sort of like how, Pantone, the color company, they always say the color of the year is this today. And it's you think about where that comes from. And I think the food industry does this a lot too. I don't think they did some exhaustive survey to find out the opinions of tastemakers and designers to say, what should the color be? I think they literally just said we got to sell a lot of white this year.
We got to get behind white. It's got to
You know
go.
what
It's
I mean? Yeah.
true. Yeah.
So I think, and that's part of the interesting part about like social media is like it's very convoluted to tell, like, is someone talking about this trend because they need to sell me a supplement, or are they really like
Mm.
being, anthropologists for it? So I think there's a whole ball of like trends that are out there that you can kind of more tangibly see on any social media network or anything like that. And then I think there's other things that I think should be trending, but aren't
Mm.
necessarily like, headlines today, things like soil health, things like biodiversity, things like sustainable hedonism. Like those three things get me more excited about the future of food than anything else. But I know that like if you go to TikTok, you're going to be scrolling for days before you find someone to talk about that. You
Talk
know what I
about
mean?
that piece of food. It's funny because we're actually going to have a fellow of my Aspen Food Fellowship, Michael Barron, who works in regenerative ag. He's going to come
Hmm.
on and do a whole segment on that. So,
What?
which I will step us back to one of the trends I am actually really liking as a dietitian in sort of the food, agriculture, and health space is food as medicine. And people are catching on to it and they're realizing that food has an impact to people, to the planet, to
Yeah.
our health in a really powerful way, which I've been a dietitian for almost, 20 years and that hasn't been a thing. So it's really exciting, but I like the point that you make, which is like there's still layers to that onion that we need to peel back that they aren't trending yet.
Yeah. Well, and so food is medicine. I'm totally with you on that. I would link that to biodiversity because if you believe that food is medicine and that food has healing powers of all kinds of sorts, if it, we as a world, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of foods and plants and animals that we can kind of potentially
Mhm.
eat. We probably globally really only eat like 100 of them. You know what I mean? And so if you believe that food is medicine, you would want to fight for biodiversity because that's kind of like if food is medicine and you're only eating 100 out of 30,000 kind of possible foods, it's like you're only allowed to buy Advil at the pharmacy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Which is
Like,
crazy to think about because it's not how we used to eat. Really, how we used to eat was more of what's in season.
yeah,
And now we've created such a supply chain structure to really kind of push for what you're saying, which is these even fruits and vegetables. As I wear my Have a Plant shirt, we have retained ourselves to specific crops that are the most common that we see showing up in most American dietary patterns.
absolutely. And I think for an individual eater, and I totally recognize that the idea of global ecological biodiversity is such a big, daunting problem that
Yeah.
most people don't have a direct hand on. But I would also just kind of reframe that. I mean, obviously, we want the big natural diversity, but biodiversity is also just finding new foods to add to your diet and your routine. In the past year, I'm into trying to do a good job on my fiber, so I threw in flax seeds into my diet every morning,
Oh, I
right?
love it.
And, flax seeds are nothing new, but for a lot of people, they are. They're like, "What is a flax seed?" You know what I mean? And so, to me, that's kind of like a way to tackle biodiversity from an individual standpoint, because 'cause I'm not just buying all the same stuff. And not only am I getting something that's new and interesting to taste and eat, but I'm getting, like I said, like if you believe food is medicine, it's another food medicine that I've introduced to my diet, right? And so, if we really believe that food is medicine, we should all want biodiversity because it means more medicine for everybody.
We actually just did a podcast on healthy fats. We talked a lot about omega 3s and omega 6s and the dairy
Big
matrix
topic these days.
with Dr. Kevin Mackey, who's like one of the leading lipidologists. And I love, yeah, throw some flaxseed in. As a dietitian, I can get behind that because I think we don't think about sometimes the power of what we put on our plate. I will tell patients this, clients this all the time. Sometimes the power of putting really nutrient dense, diverse things on your plate starts to crowd out the things that we don't want instead of having this approach to food that can be really negative or kind of demonizing certain foods. I love your point about biodiversity. So I would be on board with that being a trend we get behind.
I think those kinds of things need better translation. I mean, soil health is the same way too. Like the average eater probably isn't against soil health, but they're probably not for it either because they just don't know what it even means, you know?
Yeah,
In
I
fact,
think
a lot
talk
of
about that because I think a lot of our listeners, they're over here. I'm working with athletes and parents and families, and we're just setting a foundation. How do you get enough protein? How do you get healthy fats? How do you get the right carbohydrates? We're talking performance nutrition. So talk a little bit for a minute before we get Michael on about soil health and
I
explain it to our
so
listeners.
I mean, I think there's a great analogy maybe for, the athletes in your audience is, here's why soil is important to food. It's like being on a sports team like that just has a really great culture. that has great
Mm.
trainers, that has great assistant coaches, maybe your quarterback, if the coach is just really, a good leader and really tactically like smart. The analogy I kind of make is that's what soil does for food. You could be a superstar on your team, right? You could be a superstar in the farm, like some vegetable that's really amazing. But if you plant it in crappy soil, you're not going to really have that thing thrive. And in the same way is in sports. If you don't surround yourself with people that have a mind towards performance and giving you an environment that nurtures your development and you to be the most competitive thing that you are, that's like you being in crappy soil, you know?
Yeah.
And we see this in college, especially now with like NIL and transfers. It's like, the second the environment, at whatever university seems like it's not a really good fit for me, I'm jumping ship to get to better places. And so like to me, I'm like, yeah, you're trying to get into better soil,
Yeah, I
So
love that analogy because we talk a lot with our athletes. Obviously, we're a faith-based organization and we talk about your roots and
yeah.
some of those things, your integrity, your character. That's like you're talking about like your roots. But I also like that analogy because when we think about plants and we think about nutrient density, the richer your soil, the more nutrient dense what you're getting from that soil.
I
So
think it's
vitamins, minerals, I think that's really
Yeah,
fascinating.
and I think it's so intuitive on so many levels. Like you said, with the soil is your congregation, it's your community, it's the people you sit next to at church and have Sunday brunch with afterwards. That all contributes to your growth. So, I mean, I think those kinds of things that on the surface maybe sounds just like, what is this? I don't care about soil. What does this mean for me? I think they're just missing a really good translation layer to kind of communicate to people why it actually does matter to you.
Yeah. Well, I think they feel big and they feel hard. I
So
think
big.
that's how 20 years ago food as medicine felt. I remember coming into the industry when it was like, we can't even hear what you're saying because that seems so far away
Yeah.
and it seems so hard. And I think the more we walk, it's exciting for me because the more we walk into the space is like food does have implications to health. And the way we grow our food has implications to health.
Yeah.
I think as we walk closer to that, it's more translatable and people can start to go, oh, okay, I can wrap my head around support. But I think you're right, Mike. I think so much of it is how do we translate that to behaviors that consumers can support that help support those initiatives?
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah, you gotta break the problem down. I mean, I think it's just a matter of deciding to focus on it. I'm speaking to the food industry now because, I mean, Coca-Cola built literally a culture around a sugary soda.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? Like, th
Yes.
so they can prove you can build a mythology around just about literally anything.
Anything.
Uh, and so I'm kinda like, can we get, like, all the people who ever worked and contributed on those, like, amazing Coca-Cola commercials to work on some of this stuff? Like, that would be amazing.
Well, a further step back from that, can we get the people who set what that prioritization and focus is to set it as a
Yeah.
prioritization and focus so that we can go after it? Yeah.
Well, and I think, like, this is you sent over some of your predictions, and one of yours that I immediately gravitated towards was, sustainability meets ROI, and I totally agree with that for sure because business entities don't inherently have a moral compass built into them per se. I mean, very few d
People
are
who
like
work there do, Mike. That's what I would say.
that's
And
the
then
tension, yes.
that's the tension. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's a thing that's really run off a spreadsheet where the numbers on the spreadsheet usually trump whatever vote somebody else has for it. You know what I mean? And so that is what it is, right? I don't know how to get around that in the near term, right? So I think like for now, we kind of have to work for that. I love the sustainability meets ROI thing to me because I take it even like in a different direction where I've been a big advocate of sustainable hedonism. And that's also one of those things where I can't point to like 5 or 6 brands that are exemplifying that. It's one of those things I think should be trending.
Yeah.
And by and large, survey after survey I've ever done with clients and customers, we say, what influences your food buying decisions? As if I think I'm going to get a different answer. Because every single time I do it,
Interesting.
it's the same damn answer. Tastes good, affordable, convenient, right? It's like I'm like, why did I do this study again, right? So and so I think that when you talk about sustainability, unfortunately, I don't think everyone is naturally hardwired to act on sustainability all the time. That's pretty safe to say, I think. They are hardwired to act towards personal pleasure, flavor,
Mhm.
things that they like, right? I always
Yeah.
talk about like, junk food snacks like Doritos and Cheetos. They make billions a year and there's no sustainable value to it at all. Why do they make billions? Because they were literally just designed to be purely hedonistic, right? And
Yeah.
so I think that like people that are trying to sell their more sustainable vegetable or whatever, they usually kind of come at you with like, oh, this thing's carbon neutral. And I was like saying, like, you're not speaking the same language people use
You're
to buy
not.
food. Can I taste the carbon neutrality of this? Like, what does
Oh
that
my
even
God,
mean,
so
you
true.
know?
You're like, "What does that mean for me?" And honestly, that's what people I mean, at the end of the day, like, we all what does it mean for me? Yeah.
And it's not to say that, like, all these people, like, hate the planet and want it to blow up. I just think it's a mismatch, you know? It's just a
Yeah.
mismatch in how people what mindset they're in, right? And so, like, a future that I would love to see is, like, how can we as the industry, and I think it's everybody from farmers to marketers to branders to retailers to whatever, how do we turn the most sustainable foods into the most desirable ones?
Yeah.
Right? Like, every day, like, I live by a Chick-fil-A, there's a line out the door for the
Mm.
Chick-fil-A, it's like that everywhere, right?
The
And I'm
Lord's
like,
chicken, don't you talk about that chicken in that way, Mike. I mean, people love it, and
"No,
I
I'm
it
not
it gets
knocking at
this, like
all."
no, I get this it gets this halo, and while I love Chick-fil-A and they do great things for their communities, like, it gets this halo of even being healthy.
Well, that's my point is, like, fried chicken is almost guaranteed to almost give you a line, you know what I mean? It's like, how do
Yeah.
we get to a world where I'm seeing a line around, I don't know, some place that maybe is also selling chicken, but it's like a, regeneratively grown chicken, and it was
Yeah.
served with kind of vegetables that came from the farm nearby that also grew alongside of it, right? Like, can that also be something that garners lines like
Or how do we
Chick-fil-A?
get the major brands and companies to your point earlier, it's like people love Chick-fil-A. They love what they support. So then let's get their leaders on board with making some of these changes that do make an impact. Because I think about this for nutrition and I joke about it being fried chicken, but I'm like, at least in the last 10 years, Chick-fil-A has they now at least have grilled nuggets and they have kale salads. And I'm
Yeah,
like, I am willing to sacrifice a little bit of the things I really want in this space to walk us to a path to good. I've had to learn to do that sitting across these industries because I
yeah.
know we're not going to get there overnight. It can be personally dissatisfying, but it's like, how do we just get to better? And then how do we kind of hold ourselves to continuing to move to better instead of just accepting, like, well, it's just always been that way and it's always going to be that way.
I think about this so much because you're right. I think so many of these issues actually are actually determined not by data about sustainability or climate change or even nutrition. It's defined by like governance of big companies and incentives. You know what I mean? Like, I was working on a project with Danone about, and I call it Danone because we were working with the French office, not the American office.
Yes.
Dan in here, but like, we were working on a project around sustainability and the future of sustainability, and their CEO, and this is all public, but like their CEO was known for being like an activist in sustainability that just happened to be the CEO of Danone. He got fired in the middle of our project. And I almost think that if you're going to look to big brands to be the driver of the next huge sustainability movement, whether it's the next organic movement, whether it's the next regenerative movement or whatever, you almost need big food to make so much flipping money that they have just a giant pile of surplus cash. And that might sound counterintuitive, but I've worked with enough corporations to see that like when companies are really doing well, that's when they tend to invest more in innovation and things that take longer transition. Like to convert
Yeah.
a meaningful amount of farmland to regenerative, let alone organic, is a process. It's going to take 5-10 years to do that, and you're not going to see all that money come back right away, right? And so when it's not a good place when like big food companies are stretching their revenue and their profit, they're laying people off, like that's
Yeah.
not a good time for them to invest in a decade-long regenerative thing, right? So paradoxically, I almost think like if you want name your favorite big food brand to do that, they need like 9 quarters of like double-digit growth or something
Yeah.
like that. You know
Well,
what I
but
mean?
you know what's funny? And I translate this so much. So I have to read this post to you. And I need to connect you with Michael, he from my food fellowship, because he's
Mhm.
actually now working with Trinity Ag Tech. And they're trying to basically like do exactly what you're saying, which is they're trying to put an ROI to some of this. Because when you think about like the investment in nature and the investment in it's just, it feels like dead capital and it
Yeah.
doesn't really feel like it has a strong return on ROI. So I feel like they're trying to shift that. But what I was kind of going back to say is I think about this for the nutrition space. What I have had to do over the last 12 years working for a food company who, when I came on board, honestly, we cared about health and nutrition, but
Yep.
we weren't really ready to put our money where our mouth was because we couldn't see what the ROI is. And one of the things I have like felt like I have just had to learn and dig for and like kind of cultivate is there is a space that is both good for customer and good for business.
Mhm.
Now, at that inflection point, it's not exactly what I would want to see as a dietitian in how
Uh-huh.
people change. But again, this goes back to it's a step closer. And
Yeah.
I'm willing to die to that a little bit to get us closer to the goalpost and to know that the company can feel good about the investment because they're making a return on what is walking us towards health. And it feels very similar in the sustainability space that it's like we need to continue to kind of, again, just like walk our paths
Yeah.
in this way where again, there has to be an ROI on it. So I love that as a trend because I think we have to see this, food is medicine. Yes, I think that's a trend that's worth continuing investing in. I love biodiversity as a topic. I love thinking about soil health. I think we need stronger capture of the ROI in these
Yeah.
spaces that we can continue to invest in them. I absolutely would love to see that as a continued trend.
Well, and I think even, like, with soil health, right, I think, there's a big black box that we don't understand how conditions in the soil, how they actually fully, impact, like, the nutrition of a particular
Mm,
vegetable, say, and then you kinda have to do that study for every single vegetable differently, right, because it's gonna have a different effect. But, like, if we fast forward 25 years and all of our most talented scientists have cracked that code, and now we know that, like, "Oh, if this soil composition is like this, your food is gonna be more rich in this vitamin," or whatever. I think that would be a holy grail slam dunk for the sustainability movement because then you could actually now officially and scientifically translate why soil health matters to individuals, right? Because then you can change the marketing. Because right now it's really tough to say, like, oh, buy this, this helps healthy soil health. As opposed to like say, buy this apple, it's got triple the amount of vitamin whatever in it, right? And
yeah.
then in the little print, it can say, because it was grown in this healthy soil, but you don't lead with that.
Yeah.
Nobody attracts to that. They say like, "Oh, of course I'm gonna buy this apple that's more nutritious." And so I think that's a holy grail because then you've got companies again, they're not inherently designed to be sustainable. They're inherently designed to be profitable. If you can make an argument that says, "Well, this is more nutritious and people want that," that's your top line revenue that's gonna grow, and it's gonna incentivize the company to support that as much as possible. And if they realize, well, why is this apple so delicious? Well, it's because we changed our soil. We understand it. Well, we better invest in soil because that's the thing driving our revenue. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Well,
so connections, we need them.
I agree with that, and I see this space from such an interesting perspective of how long it's taken us to get to where we are around food and health, and
Yeah.
I feel like as we do that, to your point, and what I'm seeing, over the past decade, I came to, HEB working there, and we would survey folks, and there was still a big bucket of customers who did not care at all about health, and
Mm.
now today, 10 years later, we look and it's like, okay, everyone has shifted. And I
Mhm.
would love to pull sustainability along with that, to your point. So it's like as they're eating this food and it tastes really good and they know it's good for them and it's an affordable and it's convenient, then they're going, "Oh, okay." And then it kind of reaffirms that cycle that we're looking for. I do think it's going to take time. I also think to the point you talked about one of the things I will often talk with folks about is the data in the food space is unfortunately, and just the research, the nutrition
Yeah.
research. So to your point of like digging into what are the impacts of this soil specifically on these various crops. And even, a lot of nutrition research right now today is observational. And so I do agree with, and maybe that's a prediction is like, I would love to see more investment in studying these spaces so that we can quantify them so that we can put an ROI to them. So like that's a whole other one we didn't lay down, but I would lay that down of like we need more research investment in some of these spaces.
Well, and I think that's where like AI, I think is, I mean, AI has a lot of like use cases, right? And I think typically a lot of people I talk to, like their first thing about AI is like, oh, you use it as like a personal nutrition tool. And it can certainly help with that. I would think.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the most interesting stuff AI is doing is behind the scenes on like the really kind of just massive data crunching and stuff like that to find connections between, you know, I mean, like the protein folding problem, which is kind of an arcane problem that people outside of the medical industry don't really know about. It's an
Yeah.
insanely complicated thing to predict how amino acids will fold into a protein, has huge implications for drug discovery. Google DeepMind solved that problem like last year with
Yeah.
their AI, and I think they only worked on it for, like, 7 years.
Which AI is one of our predictions. So let's talk about this because I feel like
Yeah.
AI in 3 different spaces, Mike. So
Okay.
talk a little bit about like I think that's a great example of AI's impact to health. And that's one space. The
Yep.
other one is ag, which I
Yep.
think AI has some implications there, and I would love your thoughts on it. And then just food, how I'm seeing it even used from a food retail perspective, food nutrition retail, like, but give me your thoughts on those 3 spaces.
I think the first 2 spaces you mentioned are much more mature than the 3rd. I
Mm.
think researchers and stuff like that, like using machine learning, they've been using that for a while. I think this AI. I think the recent hype is so hyped because AI finally became a consumer product. You know,
Yeah.
and of course they're all benefiting from all the advances that we've had in models and stuff like that over the last 5 years. Behind the scenes, researchers have been using machine learning. There's a company called Brightseed, and they have this really interesting model where they're using machine learning to scan plant genomes, thousands and thousands of plant genomes to say, is there a molecule somewhere in there that we don't know about that maybe it looks like a lipid, or maybe it looks like a sugar, or maybe it looks like a protein, right? And companies like that are attacking the thing that I was talking about earlier about biodiversity. Is they're kind of saying this is a needle in the haystack problem. Yes, okay, we're aware there's 30,000 foods we could eat. That's not that helpful because where do you start? Where you just sit there and eat all 30,000? Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
It was a little
And
overwhelming.
that's what I mean. It's crazy. So, they're literally using the machine learning approach to crank through all of that data to say, like, let's just first look for molecules that maybe have nutrients or functional properties that we just didn't know about before. Maybe you'll find the next alternative sugar there that's better than all the rest of them, right? Because
Yeah.
they found something that looks like sucrose, but is like slightly more, better for you. Who knows, right? And so, yeah, I think the AI stuff on the back end, ag too. I think there's that as well too. There's a little bit more maybe of a hardware thing because, people are gonna have to buy a drone or something like that to do some of that
Yeah.
stuff, but I think that's so powerful, being able to be more precision to say like, "Oh, okay, I just have to spray some pesticide here on this little plot versus blanketing the whole thing." That's a net win, in my opinion, to step towards good, like you're saying. On the
Well, and I'd love
consumer.
to see subsidies around that. I feel like our poor
Yeah,
farmers sometimes, our farmers and ranchers are just squeezed in what they're expected to deliver,
totally.
and they're not running these super profitable businesses. And everyone's kind of acting like a middleman and taking a piece from them. I would love, as we think about that space of AI investment, how it helps the end consumer, but how it helps the entire supply chain, like be subsidized a little bit to help them.
That comes back to your sustainability meets ROI thing, like we talk about,
Mhm.
like, big corporations, but also farmers. Farmers are corporations, right? And
Yeah.
and so they need. You're right, like, the best time to buy a precision ag drone is not when you're struggling to pay off your loans or your insurance, right?
Yeah.
It's when
Not
you
when you
have.
can barely pay the bills.
That's
Yeah.
what I mean, like, you can't talk to them about buying a drone, that's insane, right? So, I think there's that, so but I think there's value nevertheless. We just have to figure out how to get that value to people. I think for consumer, people are starting to just kind of figure it out a little bit more. I think the thing that I'm observing is people are just kind of maximizing, ChatGPT has become the Kleenex of AIs, right? I think it's
Yeah.
like there's many AIs, but that one is so popular. I think if used correctly, you can get a lot out of it on just like, anything from like a recipe swap. That's a pretty cool thing that they can do. I can show it a picture of some recipe I found in a magazine and say, but I don't like that ingredient. I can't eat that. Change it for me, and it'll do it with reasonable accuracy. But I think that is all kind of leading up to the point where, like, your AI can know how you write because it can access all of your emails, right? What is the analogy for being able to give you nutrition advice that's catered towards you, And maybe you need a dietitian to kind of handhold you through that because maybe it's a little much, or you need that person to professionally, like, audit that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Make sure it's not hallucinating to tell you to eat, like, 90 grams of flax seeds every morning, right? Um,
Or turmeric.
so
People can have arrhythmias from it. I'm like, turmeric is great. It's wonderful. You should absolutely put it in your smoothie. But also, if you put too much, you can feel like you're having a heart attack.
it's too much. So I think it's I think there's like a lot that can be done. I think the other thing that I look at with AI right now is like it's at the point where I think you people get out of it what they put into it, right?
Yeah.
I think there's a really big difference between the person that kind of uses it like Google to just say like, "Are flax seeds bad for me?" Which is kind of a
which is
not the right
84%. I
question.
read a research article the other day and I was so surprised at this. A colleague sent it to me and they're like 84% of consumers have at least once used. And I think of that, 60% are using frequently these AI agents, ChatGPT,
Totally.
Perplexity, to search those health related questions.
It's yeah, I was gonna say they were replacing Google, but Google's also inserted their AI, which is actually quite formidable in there, so Google
Yeah.
is also AI, right? I yeah, I think I think you get it. You know, if you're gonna ask just like kinda a reductive question, you're gonna probably get a reductive answer, right?
Yeah.
But if you ask like, "I've got this body type, I've got this cholesterol issue, you know, blah, blah, blah. I usually don't have problems eating fiber. This is my normal breakfast routine. Are flax seeds right for me?" Like, you're gonna get a totally different answer because you gave it actual real context. I think it's impossible at this point, unfortunately, to put AI back in. It's the genie that it's not gonna go back in the bottle. As a dietitian, because I recently worked with the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and this is one of the issues that we looked at is like the just digital tech and how do you know, how does that fit into a dietitian's like workflow? And I think like I think the dietitian community, nutrition community has to figure out how to use AI as a force multiplier to double
Yes.
down and what they're doing. I don't think it's don't look at it necessarily as a replacement for you. Yes, some people are going to use it instead of
Sure.
going to see a dietitian. Very little we can do to stop that. But when you do have somebody in there, like it's like any profession, like use it to do the things you can't do or don't wanna do so you can do the things you do best. Like,
Yeah.
that to me is the use case.
Well, and I think the value of, and I see this in the data space, and I just recently started working with two amazing dietitians as I've transitioned to supporting work for Food Health Co., who they are working in Python, running the back end of systems, cleaning AI data and hygiene. And so I'm like, I don't think it will, I do think to your point, AI agents will change the way we act as dietitians, but I also think it will open up new opportunities for us to utilize our expertise to power other things.
Yes, and I think also the other thing that is, like, AI is like, somebody told me they were taking an AI class, and I kinda winced because I was kinda like, "It's not wrong that you're trying to, like, get your skills up, that's great and all, but, like, the class for AI is kinda built into it."
It is. Yeah.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And so that's
Well,
what
but
I think
I
is
will say to your point though, I think some people can you benefit from learning how to prompt
sh
accurately.
yeah, that's true, but you could also just say, like, "I don't know I have this idea, I don't know how to write it in a prompt, can you help me write the prompt?"
Yeah,
You know
that's
what I
true.
mean? Like, I think that's probably the most powerful thing about AI, honestly, and it's why it's taken off so fast, is that the barrier to entry is literally 0,
Yeah.
and it's like, it doesn't matter if you don't know how to code or even good with
Yeah.
computers. You know how to ask a question. Like, I always say, like, don't treat it as like an LLM on your screen. Treat it as like you're staying in a hotel and you call the front desk and you need to, "How do I get an extra bed in here?" You know what I mean? That person
Yeah.
will and you're just having a conversation, right? It was like, or
Yeah.
"What time does room service close?" You know, and stuff
You don't
like
just
that.
want a pillow. You're like, how do I do the logistics of getting a
That's what I
new
mean. It's
bed?
like a concierge for everything from your work to your personal life. And so don't look at it like a text box. Like treat it as if it's literally like a concierge who can help you. Even if you don't know what you want, they can help you find out what you want or ask the right questions. So that's the attitude I take with it. If people are in the data tracking mind, which maybe you know some of your athletes are and stuff like that, like it's an amazing thing to crunch a ton of data like almost instantly. Like here's a spreadsheet of all my workouts for the last 9 years. Are there patterns I'm not seeing here, you know?
Yeah.
And like you're not going to sit there and go through the thing and just shove it into the AI and it'll come back to you in like 5. And you know what? If nothing comes back, you wasted 5 minutes of your time, no big deal.
Yeah. Instead of hours of your time crunching through those spreads. Yeah.
I think that kind of stuff is going to look like how we look at paper maps today.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That is a great analogy of like, it's just, we're going to continue to work differently as we get smarter in these spaces. So
Totally.
these are all great things. What other predictions, like what other things did we not touch on that you feel like we should talk to our listeners about?
I waffle constantly back and forth between like the next generation, like are they going to embrace technology and food more or less than us? Because I've seen this kind of pattern of like
Oh, I think
oscillation.
more.
Yeah, okay. I can make arguments for both sides of that. More because I think, yeah, you if you grow up in a world like my daughter's 5, she's not buying her own food yet, but, like, it's a very different prospect for high-tech foods like that for somebody like her versus me, and so I'm interested to see, like, do they lean more into that technology because they don't have the same hangups as maybe I did, about these things? So maybe that they can lean into it. I also think that, like, there's kind of a sense of just kinda jadedness around marketing as well too, you know?
Um,
I mean, like, TikTok got popular for a lot of reasons, but I think one of the reasons it got popular is the format is totally un varnished, right? Like, everyone's making their perfect Instagram photo that's the lighting is right. It looks like a professional thing even though you did it on your phone. TikTok's great because, like, some of the most famous people on TikTok literally just open the phone on their crappy front camera, and they're just, like, in a
they're just
closet with, like,
raw. Yeah.
junk in the back, and they've got, like, 25 million subscribers, and you're like, "Oh my gosh." And so, to me, that kind of indicates how maybe there's a generation that's also just, like, used to just the realness of that, and they're just like, "I see through all of your marketing BS brand X,"
Yeah.
and I'm just not having it, Or
I
like,
do think so.
yeah,
That is a prediction I would double down on is like two things that you said in there. And one is like, I do think as a social platform, Instagram is dying a little bit because I think they're shifting to more of like the YouTube, the TikTok, like raw.
everything's a short
People
form
want
video.
real. They want to know, like, what's my friend that I trust? And so I think that's a really interesting space as we think about nutrition, health, sustainability. Those are places I think we're going to have to get stronger at educating those voices so that they can communicate to their audiences.
We really need that. Like, I think public schools should do like an internet literacy kind of thing because at the same time, well, you've got a generation leaning into the realness. You've got AI, which is a tool for a lot of things, but one of the tools
Mhm.
is it's a tool for fakeness. And so, like, I work a lot with like AI and images, especially. It's interesting because, like, in our group text we had with like some of my friends, somebody sent a photo, and I instantly was like, "That's an AI like thing of food," and my other friends didn't notice it right away. And I think that only came because I work with AI images so much, and I can kind of just be around it and kind of sense it. I think we really need that for like people just in general, not just in nutrition, but like, how do you tell if a video is a deep fake from a politician or something like that or not? You know what I mean? We
I
need
do
that.
feel like our that's another trend I'll jump back on that you said is like, I think the next generation is going to be very skeptical because of a lot of what they've been exposed to
Yeah.
earlier. Like my kids will already point out to me, like I'll look at something and they're like, "Mom, that's fake. You know that's fake, right?"
And that's, I think, a good thing to
I
have.
think it's a great thing, and
Yeah.
then I also think they will care more, like, I already see it, we're coaching these young athletes, 8 to 18. Yeah, we're impacting their parents, but I feel confident we can raise generations of kiddos who care about what they put into their bodies in a really powerful way that translates. So, like, I think that tech use and understanding the ability to be skeptical and filter for those things, and this next generation's desire to want better foods and better food systems, I actually think is gonna be really strong.
I think the athletic community could be such great advocates for better food systems because I think like the beauty of like athletics is it's such a great developmental thing to be a part of, right? Knowing how to set goals, meet challenges, overcome obstacles, deal with the suck and the pain of like a hard workout, but still
Mhm.
get up the next day and do it again. Building the team around you, right? Fighting for better. Those are all attributes where if you just remove the word athletics and you say like food systems, geez, we need more of that. We need more athletes like going after, I don't know, shaping farm policy or something like that, the same way they would shape a workout plan to get to the Olympics one year, you know what I'm saying? It's like
Yeah.
they work on big audacious goals that don't happen overnight, and I think the food system is sum total of big audacious goals that don't
You're
happen.
giving me chills, Mike, because that's part of why we started Span
It's
Athletics is like
great.
every kiddo is gonna go on and be a pro athlete. Some will and wonderful. They'll have the finances to help us reinvest in this work. The ones who don't, they're gonna have the perseverance, they're gonna have the drive, they're gonna have the ability to get through that suck, and we hope they'll understand the commitment of how it's impacted them and their own health and their families and kinda give back to this community that we're trying to drive.
That's totally, I mean, that's the yeah, I think that's the real kind of the value of it, right? And like I did improv comedy for like 7 years. I never had an aspiration to like be on SNL or anything like that or even be a professional comedian. I took away from it, like, this improved just my public speaking ability, my ability to talk to people, my ability to think on my feet. And so, like, I think athletics is like that, but a much more generalized point of view, right? It's just
Yeah.
how to get through tough stuff.
Yeah, these are our type A people, and I always joke that if I can pour in and invest into these kiddos, they are going to be the difference makers.
Yeah.
And we wanna raise a generation of difference makers that changes the trajectory of
Yeah.
our future. And, like,
But
I'm
also
confident we can do that.
But also tactically with nutrition and food, I think an athlete is more predispositioned to wanna track their diet and watch what they eat just because of they've gotta meet a goal, like a tangible goal, right? And, like, I think, like, I totally believe in, like, the broken, windows theory as well too. Like, I think once you start to do one healthy thing for yourself or one unhealthy thing for yourself, the rest come in dominoes usually. And so, yeah, I think that attitude of either probably tracking more of their performance and health data than the average person too, which I think is also just another tool to throw in the toolkit that the average person might not have. So that's cool too.
Yeah, I love that. Well, what else? What did we not cover that you would leave our listeners with? We talked a lot. We talked about AI, we talked about soil health, we talked about biodiversity, we talked about kind of the future of food and what that looks like
Yeah.
as we think about nutrition and tech. What did we not talk about?
I think in a longer term thing, and I think this is coming out of COVID, especially young adults that kind of came through COVID, because I think what happened during COVID was obviously we all kind of had to be our own little chef for a little bit to whatever extent it is. I think no matter what level you're on, if you're a 10 out of 10 chef, you went to an 11. If you're a 1 out of 10 chef, you went to 2. But y'all kinda, like, updated your skills a little bit more. I think the long-term effect of what that could be is that in the future, people eat more food that comes out of kitchens and less food that comes out of factories.
I would love that as a retail dietitian, and I'll always be a retail dietitian.
Yeah.
I would love that. It's so funny you say that too, Mike. I have to tell a funny anecdotal story, but
Yeah.
we bought this awesome stainless steel, like, stovetop popcorn maker,
Okay.
and we're making, like, because my family loves popcorn, and we go through so much of it, and I was like, "Why aren't we just making this, like, from the kernels? It would be cheaper, and it would taste better," and it, like, brings me back to my childhood because we did
Yeah.
those things. My boys were, like, over the moon, like, "Mom, why is this popcorn so delicious?" And it's like,
Yeah.
that's one example of a million places where or even homemade bread, where it's like, it takes a handful of ingredients as people are over here preparing for this winter storm in Texas and everyone's buying every loaf of bread. I'm like, grab you some flour and some yeast and a little rosemary and, like, you got yourself a loaf of bread.
And that was probably the one silver lining from the terrible pandemic is
Yeah.
that it did get people's hands dirty a little bit more for that. And I totally subscribe to the little broken window theory on that too. It's like I always advocate like literally like don't even stress about if am I buying the right spaghetti? Am I buying the right tomatoes? It doesn't matter if you're just starting out. Use whatever you have. And if you just keep up the habit, you tend to build like a taste for it to be like, okay, maybe I started buying crappy tomatoes, but I didn't know that. If I'm making that same tomato spaghetti dish like 10 times in a row, I'm going to start to say, like, I think I've hit a plateau with these tomatoes. What else is out there? I have an anecdote too about the thing. Like, King Arthur Flour is an older client of ours. King Arthur always had a really tough time, not a really tough time, but like, it was weird because, like, you can buy King Arthur in a Walmart, but they're, like, the most expensive flour, right? They're, like, the most expensive flour that's also mainstream, right? And flour is a category most people think flour is flour is flour. They don't
Yeah.
really know. So why would I pay extra if all flour is the same? The pandemic led to their biggest revenue year of the 120 odd years history of them because people actually had time to not only get their hands dirty and maybe they started with cheaper flour and then because they were focused on like, oh, I know how that flour tastes and I know how the King Arthur one tastes, I'm going to go towards that, right? I always say, like, if you don't paint, how would you ever have an opinion on what paints to buy?
Yeah. Yeah,
You know
no,
what I
I
mean?
love that. I love that prediction on trend of, like, getting us back in the kitchen and getting us to really think about getting us to, like, taste and prepare and see the outcome of the inputs of our food, because I do think that will continue to contribute to changing how we think about this
And
space.
I also see that as just like a cultural trend that's really valuable. I think that idea of like having friends over and cooking something from scratch is should not be viewed as a chore. And I think unless people are viewing that as a chore, they're kind of viewing it as like the main event. It used to be
Yeah.
like, oh, let's go see, a movie and do dinner. Now I think it's just like, let's just do dinner and screw the movie, right? Like the
Yeah.
act of us getting our hands dirty, making something together is the movie.
Well, and I'm such an advocate for and I can use this analogy back to faith and like how Jesus used the table to truly like
Yeah.
convince people. But I also think about that for our food fellowship. If you think back to early societies, like how people created connection and built these societies as they got around a table and
Yeah.
they consumed a meal together. And so I love that prediction because I think there's so much power in just like getting around the table with good food and driving connection, that I
I
would love
mean,
to see more of.
the whole nutrition community, obviously, the whole community in general has been talking about like, ultra processed foods and stuff like that. And how do we categorize them? Yada, yada, yada. There's a whole ball of wax there, right?
Oh,
I
yeah.
think the easiest way to diffuse that is just to opt out of it.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's fascinating because it's like, again, like this is such a nuanced space. We did an episode and I had Richard Black, who I think you met
Oh,
Richard.
yeah, 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 yeah.
He was on and we talked ultra processed foods and it's like it is really nuanced and it's really hard and I do think as much as people are up in arms over the new dietary guidelines, I think this whole like eat real food is a message that's like
Totally.
to your point earlier on sustainability, like how do we translate these? It's really clear to consumers. Like eat real food.
Well, exactly, and not only eat real food, but, like, I think that, like, if you're able to cook for yourself and make your own decisions, a lot of those conversations don't matter to you anymore, you know what I mean? Because the
Yeah,
dietary guidelines, yes, I agree, eat real food is big progress on that, but it's still a one-size-fits-all solution,
it
you know what I
is.
mean? And so if you're able to kinda take care of yourself and be independent for that and know what makes your body feel good, you're
Yeah,
doing what
and
works
in
for
full
you.
disclosure, like, I feel like some of the messages they don't as a dietitian, they don't translate to varying income segments, like, customers who are
Yes.
solving, a mom who's working 3 jobs and, like, real food that's convenient might look very different in her home and dinner table, and so I don't wanna gloss over that and act like
100%. There's literally a
there's nothing
ribeye on the graphic. It's
complexities,
like the
right,
most
yes, and that's
expensive cut of this
yeah,
beef, you
and
know what I
that's
mean?
probably not realistic, like, some of those
Yeah,
expensive items are not realistic for certain segments of the population. Again, I always go back, and this is why I, like, do believe in the power of dietitians, even if we think about how AI personalizes, is, like, we should be asking those questions about how we solution for what's gonna meet the needs of an individual or a household, because it's like yours, Mike, is gonna look different than mine, is gonna look different than my neighbors, is gonna look different than the person who lives in a neighborhood 5
yeah.
miles down the road, and so I do think the nature of how we've oversimplified some of it has made it harder to actually get to the real nuances that start to solve the problems. But yeah, I wouldn't want to not disclaimer that.
I wholeheartedly agree with that, that I think as a dietitian, you kinda also have to be like a social worker on top of just giving
Oh,
the nutrition advice because 'cause you're like, "Okay, here's what the data says you should do. Now I've gotta translate that to your life situation," you
yeah.
know?
Well, and I just last night was like re-listening to a great podcast from Clancy Harrison. I don't know if you know her, but it was on food insecurity. And I think I should have her on because it's a whole space of, I think, what food insecurity really looks like in the face of it. It's hard to judge a book by the cover. You sometimes will see clients in practice and I'll start to ask them questions and I'm like, oh man, this person's food insecure. They don't look like it. They might have shown up in a suit. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions around what that actually looks like. Someone could have lost a job. They've gone through a
Totally.
hardship. Like, so yeah, I just want a disclaimer with all those things. I think as we
I'm with you
oversimplify
on
that
that. I'm totally
we
with you on
want to
that.
see these things, but we also need to see a more healthful environment to transition folks to these things. And then we need to come around those that need the subsidies or the support to be able to move them along with us. And I do believe those things have to happen together.
And I think that's the role of, like, dietitians and chefs even too, because I think, like, they're the people who are gonna take that big blanket, guideline and translate it. They're the translators, you know what I mean? Like, a lot of people talk about the Eat Lancet report and all that stuff, and, the report comes out, and I'm like, "Okay, I mean, this seems like interesting science that's useful," but, like, I don't know that, like, anyone is gonna download that report and go, "We have to rethink our whole refrigerator."
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Again, it's like it's not to dismiss the information, it's just it has to be put in the right context. You gotta go further, you gotta translate it.
Well, and that's funny that you said that because I kind of a colleague and I were talking about this the other day where they're like, oh, we think the science drives everything. And I'm like, no, I do think it's this point of like the science, the policy, and the consumer's perception of the science and policy that actually is what drives the wheel. And to
Yeah,
your point, like a study like that can be picked up by thousands of different influencers and then micro translated in so many different ways. And it's like
yeah.
whatever sticks is what moves the wheel.
I mean, we need more like Bill Nye the Science guys and Bill Nye the Science girls, like, because like I love that category of person because they take really hard topics and make them almost pop culture. And I
Yeah.
think there's an equivalent for that in food. My daughter loves the Netflix show Waffles and Mochi, which is all about like teaching nutrition and food, right? And I'm like, this is awesome. I never had waffles and mochi when they just showed me the food pyramid and
Oh, I feel
said,
like my sons would love that. They would be over the moon,
"It's
especially my
great. It's
very much
so great. Yeah,
carb-loving
waffles and
12-year-old.
mochi." It's literally just like it's a puppet anyway. It's awesome. But like I do think like we are as a society doing better for sure. Even, when I just think, 20 years ago to when I was like, younger, like we've made so much progress, I think. But, more to come for sure.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for just sharing your wisdom and thoughts around this space as someone who's worked across kind of this food space for a really long time. I appreciate your wisdom that you shared with our audience. And thank you for being here today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Awesome.
Stay tuned for more real world tips and conversations with coaches, athletic directors, current and former collegiate and professional athletes, sports dietitians, sports psychologists, and other performance experts.
If this episode gave you something to chew on, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe. Nutrition is important, but let's be honest, we've all got to eat. So help us feed this podcast so we can keep fueling you.
Don't forget to join the Span Athletics community to get more exclusive content by following us on all of our social media platforms, including TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and X at span_athletics.
Until next time, stay faithful, stay fueled, and remain focused on your goals.